All right, folks, we are back with another episode of Seeds Radio. I'm with the beautiful and lovely and incredibly intelligent Alia Yarrow. And my name is Hayden, and today we are going to dive into the topic of following your heart and actually moving towards things that might be scary or terrifying, and how you know, or how we've known, sort of a reflection on our own life and where we're at in this moment as we're sort of on the edge of big movement, big change, heading into the unknown with a lot of factors that are unclear. So we're going to talk about our process in that and what comes up and how to work with that. Yeah, so let's shed some light on that.
Thank you, Hayden. Yeah, we are at this moment of kind of like the fool in the Tarot, kind of taking that step off of the cliff, the edge, the ledge of what maybe has been known or familiar, and stepping into what's unknown, unfamiliar, the void, darkness. So for those of you who don't know, we're heading off to Peru later this week on Thursday, February 7th. And we're kind of heading into the next phase of our individual and connected spiritual path.
Definitely. Yeah, and we didn't really know what we were going to talk about this evening. We just sort of felt like it was time to get back in front of the mic and start expressing, at least where we're at and what we're going through in a way that's real and true. And it's sort of been a process for us both, and for myself over the last few years, of really stepping into a lot of unknowns, of coming up against a lot of fear and resistance, yet also feeling and really connecting to this deep, inner calling that's sort of beckoning me towards, this void, and not knowing how to validate that, if that feeling is, true. Am I running away from something? Am I moving towards something? How to know, the question for me has been, how do I know, what I'm actually following is true and not some, internal fantasy or delusion in some way?
Definitely.
And so kind of reaching another moment in time where, I've been in a consistent place here with you in Virginia, learning and growing a lot over this winter and sort of having a pretty comfortable situation. And now, it's exciting and super exhilarating, and there's a lot that seems to be potentially unfolding, but there's a lot of also unknowns, and changes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I really resonate with that question of how do we know kind of what to follow, or which parts of ourselves or internal voices are kind of the ones of maybe our future self or our higher self or our intuitive knowing, pulling us forward or pushing us forward, and which are the parts of ourselves that are maybe reactive or scared or wanting to kind of give up on something. How do we distinguish between those voices or parts, and how do we know what strength looks like, or kind of autonomy looks like, versus feeling like we're actually kind of just repatterning or recreating old ways or habits of being and avoiding what's really being asked of us. Right. So I kind of have a question for you. I know that both of us within the last year-ish have made some big changes in our lives. And we've talked about kind of this internal knowing or call that was really demanding each of us to kind of let go of what we've maybe called our first adulthood, of a way of being. Both of us, we didn't know each other at that time, but we're living in California. And in so many ways, there was so much beauty in both of our lives connected to our communities and our values and creative expression and love and other aspects that were really beautiful. And yet we decided and resisted, but ultimately decided that we were going to surrender all of that and head out into the unknown, you in your van, and me also in my car, eventually crossing the country and meeting you at the Vision Fast in Colorado, heading out into a very different phase of my life and my path. So for you in that process, what did that feel like for you to hear this voice coaxing or calling or demanding you forward towards something else? And what was your relation to that voice at first? Resistant, accepting, receptive? What did that look and feel like?
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's a voice that I've sort of gotten to know like very well now and over time. You know, I'd come from a like pretty traditional upbringing and in some ways, and was in a corporate job out of college, and then the call for me, like this voice that came through, came sort of out of this like lethargic place I'd reached in life. And it was this sort of like agitation underneath the surface that like something wasn't right. Like I wasn't in the right place. Like I felt completely like uncomfortable. I was having like anxiety, like I wasn't treating myself right. And it just felt like this underlying frustration and this like agitation and this desire for movement that started. And then I read the book The Alchemist, and it was like that turned into actually like enthusiasm. And like instead of being agitated and like undirected, I was dreaming of like world travel and like leaving everything and following this voice. Like where is it trying to pull me? Like what is it trying to do? And I just had like these visions of grand adventure and, you know, exploration. And so I just like jumped off the cliff like the Fool of the Tarot card like you were mentioning. So that was like a lot. It was a mixture, but it started off as sort of agitation and frustration, maybe even some depression or feeling trapped, to then just like explosive like enthusiasm, which I then like through my fear and resistance to tremendous change that started to happen. Even though I was moving towards it, there was a lot of fear and resistance. I sort of tried to control or like dictate the parameters of what it is that was like pulling me in some ways, and sort of became attached to certain things that manifested out of that, such as like this community I found in San Luis Obispo and a partnership that I had, and you know, different things that had like gotten me, like had been totally part of this journey, but then that sort of like had also led me to a plateau. And so again, started to feel a restlessness, an agitation, a inner like knowing that there's something else, like something I needed to move towards. And it was this long, really like drawn out, slow process, because I was in a beautiful place, and there was a questioning of like, in a beautiful place, in a beautiful relationship with many amazing, beautiful friends. But there was a deeper beckoning towards, which I've now come to understand as meaning. You know, at the time, like, it was a very happy life, a very comfortable life, but there was a deeper level that was desiring meaning, like a meaningful life. And I've recognized that was the sort of underlying agitation or frustration of like, why am I not expressing like my true gifts in the world? Why do I feel, even though I have friends and relationship in place, that I'm still not offering who I am to the world? And there's something that still needs to be found, you know, or uncovered, really, you know, or made, even created. And there was like a weakness that I was living with still, and like a desire for strength and confidence. And so that really, that force again, like, started with agitation and frustration and this like longing and knowing, and then again led to, once I finally made my decision, a lot of enthusiasm, excitement, and then just a lot of process along the way. And I still feel like now I'm more like just moving with the flow of the current and constantly having to go back and forth between recognizing if I'm swimming against it or swimming with it, even if it's like terrifying and the current's moving quickly. So I know it's a really long answer, but
thank you.
there's probably a lot more in there, like a lot more nuance. But I was actually wanting to ask you the same question, but of course you got to it first. So, but I wanted to, my question was more of like, like, how do you decipher or piece apart like what it is that this like internal polar calling is, and to take, because I've been in a process of like, how much am I getting pulled or dragged along by, like social constructs, or like, like societal impulses, like for instance Instagrams of people traveling around the US in their vans as this like idyllic life. Like, is that what's pulling me forward? Have I been like programmed to try to like go after these things, or is this truly me that's speaking to me? Or like, is this trauma that I'm running away from? Is this growth that I'm running away from, or am I actually moving towards something? So how do you determine between those things?
Yeah, thank you for what you shared. And there's so much of what you shared that I want to reflect back, and I want to answer your question or respond to your inquiry. Well, for me, it's also always ongoing and unfolding. And so it's a process of continually trying to reflect and refine and discern what is kind of moving me forward in the right way and what is reactive. And I think some of the ways that help me kind of distinguish or peel back the layers of social construction or personal expectation, or just like kind of the shackles of ways of being, previous ways of being that are kind of like outdated or no longer needed, is when I'm able to have moments and they look so different, and it's these moments of kind of clarity or remembering, I guess, is like the easiest way to talk about them. And we talk about remembering a lot together, but for me it can be a very felt experience of kind of remembering a fuller glimpse of both who I am and also like who I am in relationship with the larger family of things. So like a glimpse or a snapshot of kind of, as you said, like what it would look or feel like or be like to be in my body in a way where I'm bringing forward more of my soul gifts or my gifts. Right. And from that place and that kind of place of strength, which is, I haven't yet learned how to integrate that into everyday life at every moment, but it's kind of like a touchstone that from that place, I feel like when I sit with inquiry around what is being called of me, I can have a clear like metric or like almost like compass, like a true north compass from that place of knowing what is on the kind of cutting edge of what's being asked in this time.
Right.
So I sat with that a lot last spring in making this decision to leave kind of this first adulthood of the life I'd created in California, the career that I'd been building as a clinical social worker, the community of friends that I'd been fostering and connecting with so much, and had like heartened me and given me the most sense I'd had as someone who, after leaving my family of origin for college when I was 18, like the greatest sense of kind of belonging and interconnection, and this web of, we had this women's new moon circle, which I've told you about, where we would get together on the new moon every month and, you know, break bread, share snacks, drink wine, and catch up. And then we would go into ceremony and we would have a talking piece and we'd reflect one at a time around how our intentions on the previous new moon had been coming into fruition and what our intentions were moving forward in the next lunar cycle, knowing that the new moon is such a ripe time to plant seeds or intentions, and has also been a time for women to come together in community. So leaving that, which I had so much like joy and comfort and pride in, and leaving a partnership that had so much support and love. I think there were so many moments that spring when, you know, if it was like taking a walk, or if it was sitting, or if it was like grief that kind of overcame me, and like the clarity or purification of tears, where I really knew that like what was being asked of me with this leaving was, for me, what like was needed because it was actually the scariest thing in a lot of ways that I could imagine, and yet it kept calling to me, and like wouldn't leave me alone. It was this nagging of like, you've completed certain tasks of this developmental stage of this first adulthood, you've differentiated from your family of origin over the last 12 years of being in California. You've sort of shown yourself, you know, your own internal expectations of being able to create like a livelihood, a career, a profession. You've been able to create community with souls that are like, you will be deeply connected with, you know, forever. And you have learned how to build partnership that has many gifts. And now you're like, what's being asked is to let all of that go and to move towards something that is actually different and potentially like will ask new tasks of you, new challenges of you that you don't even know yet, but that's what's needed. So
Totally.
yeah.
I love that perspective, because, you know, as we were talking about earlier about us leaving for Peru, and I had mentioned like sort of leaving in my van as these big moments of movement, but within that are like all these microcosmic, like, and a lot of that might sound like, well, like, what are you afraid of? Like, you're going to Peru, like, it's gonna be amazing, you know. There's a lot of layers there, but with context that could be revealed. But it's also this like, it's not just these big movement moments, it's also the fractal smaller moments of movement, not even away from, but oftentimes it's often towards you. You're moving towards something, and that something isn't always just happiness or joy, you know. And so it's really like, I think for me it's been about setting the intention, always like trying to feel what my intention is, and really having the root of my intentions be trying to become the highest version of myself, like the best version of myself, as an offering to the world, you know, not as something to be consumed and just like experienced in like a siloed way, but like I truly believe fundamentally that each of us have like a unique gift, a unique expression that is an offering. It's our gift that we receive, and it's our offering because it's like fundamentally not ours to own. Like, it really moves through us, through our unique individuated self as a gift. So as an intention, really, like, I've felt, and we've spoken to this before, this sense of like this pull and this push aspect that I try to feel into as like truth, as when I know like I'm headed towards like growth. There is a sense of like this energetic pulling towards, and this energetic pushing, you know, like my past self, who's like sacrificed so much and done so much to try to like live to my highest potential, is like pushing me onward, like keep going. You know, there's like more to unfold into, there's more to learn, there's more to integrate, there's more to give, there's more to serve. And then my future self being like, come along this way, you know. So there are times when it's like, that have arisen recently here, in which it's been very uncomfortable dealing with certain situations, that may feel the easiest route is detachment. The easiest route is sort of separation. And it can feel even like, sometimes it can feel like, oh, the beneficial route would be that because I'm feeling so drained, so worn. But then to really tap into what is like my higher self, like what is really being asked of me, and to realize, oh, that's actually asking me to turn towards this difficult thing, to really sit with grief and stop avoiding it and just like cry your eyes out, you know, to sit with a feeling of like spirit abandonment or whatever it may be, and not to turn away from those experiences, you know.
Definitely. Yeah. That idea of leaning into the experience and the experiences, when the tendency is such, there can be such a tendency to avoid or run away from or separate. I really resonate with that in terms of kind of these, like, these moments of movement or kind of heightened movement, although it's all fractal and there's lots of scales. And I feel that as well with like these past several months we've been here, and holding and sitting with a lot of familial struggle and grief, and the sense that at different moments it can feel very overwhelming to know how to be in right relationship in the context of big questions of mortality, existentialism, intergenerational trauma, the choice to be alive and to kind of choose to move towards wellness and healing and treatment, and sitting with those questions and deciding to move towards them and all of the emotions that come up with them, and how those questions, when held in this case with a family system, but just as they could be held within an individual or a couple or a community, like how those questions are actually like asking us to feel them fully, so that we can like internalize and process the gifts that they offer. So those questions of watching someone you love like really grapple with being alive and choosing to move towards life, how that is actually this gift of offering each of us who are connected to that person our own reflection on, in what ways am I not choosing life fully? In what ways am I still resisting my unfolding? Or am I still kind of scared of my full expression, even though that's the birthright of all life forms, is to unflower into full expression, and that full expression is filling a perfectly unique niche in the larger ecosystem of life.
We had started off saying that the subject is really like sort of following your heart, or following like your path, and like what does that look like to set out on like your spiritual path. I really resonate with the unfolding aspect, and sort of looking at nature sort of going from maybe like a winter state, or even like a germinal, like a seed state, to then unfolding and sprouting into something like a flower, or a tree like shedding its leaves in the winter and then struggling to release and open its leaves up again in the springtime. And as I've sort of stepped into this journey of like unfoldment, there's like an experience of duality that starts to come in that is really such a powerful teacher. One thing I would say is that it's certainly not an easy path, but it's certainly like a beautiful path. Certainly a complex path that holds like tremendous joy and like heightened, experiences of life, and also struggle and grief and sorrow, and like how you were mentioning about the current situation, or being around a family member who's struggling to potentially choose life or move towards that contrast, and you're moving towards that, leaving your whole life to come back and help and assist and be with and support, like exposing yourself to that like could have been easily avoided, but it's part of like your growth and your path. And so it's this experience of like duality, this moving towards like something heavy, something difficult, that allows like, even in the microcosm of being here in it, experiences of like, the other side, extreme like joy and, blissful experience.
Completely, yes. I mean, alongside making that decision this past summer to come back home to Virginia from California, in part because of the felt sense and need to be more connected to family in this process. Also alongside that was this saying yes to so much more freedom than I had experienced as an adult, and maybe in some ways like my whole life, like to be very cared for here,
right,
by my beautiful and incredible mother, and to be given the opportunity to be in relationship with my sister, both of us adults now, and my mom as an adult daughter, and my brother as an adult sister, and the joys of being able to have a few months of breathing into different possibilities, then I was able to know how to fit into living in the Bay Area, having my like professional career as a social worker, having such a busy, fast-paced life. As you're talking about the contrast, it's just so apparent that with this decision to move towards the suffering in my family and the challenge has also come just so much relief and liberation, and like moments of such like just unbelievable like fits of giggling around the magic that life can be, in terms of like the unfolding path, really having an intelligence to it and a beauty to it, and that life actually really can be like so much more playful than we often may remember within the constraints of society.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I guess really at the root of this unfoldment process, it's all really about just like moving towards more life. Like what is calling you forth is life itself.
Right. Because we are life in human form. We
Right.
are life. And
exactly.
life is calling life forward.
And especially at this time, I see this arising in so many people. My mom going through a very parallel process. So much of the youth that I've come across are asking themselves these big questions, no longer buying into the promises of society that can no longer be met or fulfilled, and are being
could never be,
can
but
never
finally
be. Yeah.
like, there's more of a collective consciousness around that. But that's not where we rest kind of our hopes and dreams.
Definitely. And so a lot of the ways of being that I had been taught, or I had been shown, or the examples that I had seen, there was a stagnation that came out of that. It's sort of like a moving towards like this confinement, this like restraint, this sort of like suffocation that I felt in that, and then turning away from that, actually turning towards what I realized now, what I was turning towards more was life. Like, and the life that is wanting to come out of me, the life that I would love to offer to the world, is also like what I'm like finding out, what's pulling me forward at the same time, and what's like calling me,
Completely. And it feels like at these times, especially when the earth is in this process of undergoing like human-made climate change and just like larger scale deforestation and pollution than we've ever seen, and things as a human species are more precarious than ever, it makes so much sense to me that life would find its resilient, adaptive, evolutionary ways to work through each of us, and to work through all forms of life, to call itself forward, and to remember as like this incredible integration of spirit and organic matter, like how to move towards celebration and the conditions that support free expression and unfoldment in a way that's like a form of like earth survival as well through
Definitely.
each of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we just look at the way we have moved in the world, you know, and the impacts of our society and our culture on the world,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much every structure of our modern culture and society, like, is fundamentally degrading and destroying and actually removing all possibilities of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a descent. It's been in a descent, you know, and we talk, it's so funny, you hear so much in the political scene and all this talk around growth and GDP and economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
These things, as they stand now, are fundamentally actually based on the destruction of our planet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those numbers, those charts as they go up are fundamentally correlated in a large way to like a lot of our industrial, you know, imperialistic like mindset and actions in the world.
Completely.
And so the driving force within us that has consumed us in this culture and society has been pulling us, I guess, away from interconnection, towards more isolation, towards more separation, towards more decay. The earth, like you were mentioning, this sort of immune response from the earth and actually from the universe itself is this awakening of consciousness within the human being. Not that it hadn't existed or that humans hadn't known this. There's a lot of indigenous cultures that fundamentally have held on to these truths in spite of, you know, imperialism. But at least as it has lived in me is the sort of this like, if I don't awaken to this, all life here on earth is threatened. And so like that awakening within, which is sort of my own spiritual path as an individual, is also vitally important to the earth's ability to survive and thrive.
Right. It's intricately connected, and also it's a mirror as a microcosm for this parallel process that the earth is going through,
Right.
in terms of needing to continue to move towards vitality and life itself in all forms. Yeah, I really resonate with that, and it feels so crazy making to live in a world that uses metrics and language such as, you know, growth and job growth and all these ideas that are fundamentally based in this industrial growth mindset and society that is so clearly the destruction of life. And what is actually needed is to have entirely different metrics that support a great turning to a life-sustaining society.
Right.
And what does that look like, and how do we continue, each of us individually, like, if we can't move towards life, then how can we expect, you know, or hope that sovereign communities can do that, that the human species can do that the earth itself can do that? It does feel so essential that before, like, I, you know, am trying to facilitate or lead or do anything in any way that's trying to make that change happen at larger scales, my work also has to be equally in part doing that same internal, introspective, intrapsychic work with and for myself, of really checking in what ways my biases, in what ways my indoctrination and our imperialistic, exploitative, like, ways of living, economic systems, political systems, are still a part of my mental constructs, are still living in my body, are still constraining the way that I can dream, both literally and figuratively. Like, in what ways am I still bound?
Right.
And therefore, like, am not going to be able to be a part of the movement that's necessary of life, joining life, and really revolutionizing what's possible on the
Right.
material plane and spiritual plane.
Yeah, like in what ways am I restricting fullest life expression within myself based on limiting beliefs or lack of perspective or just like cultural norms or societal judgments of way things should be, you know, and sort of like our growth, like we were talking about, our growth model and sort of this industrialized imperialistic culture, like how that plays out on all scales, like how we actually even judge each other, you know, as friends, as family, as culture, as society, you know, like what makes someone successful, you know, like have they gone through the established metrics, yeah, like this sort of development model of like schooling or these things, these different accolades, you know, these accumulation of stuff, like to gauge whether success is happening or whether you're on the right path, you know, versus like I truly think we know what life feels like, you know, and like to have a deeper understanding of life and nature itself as our guide, as like nature as a cooperative model, you know, nature as mutually supportive of like all elements, and that real life is like love and support and growth, like, and how it's not about just growth for me, because that would actually wouldn't be life,
Right.
if I'm just over consuming, taking, eventually that stockpile runs out and death comes. Like real life is true sustainability, which means that like what I intake, what I'm bringing in is equal to what I'm giving out, and it's this continuous perpetual cycle.
Definitely.
So,
It
like,
reminds me of like the permaculture systems.
Yep.
You know, a permaculture system that can be sustainable is being able to produce or create more energy than what is being consumed. And what does that look like at an individual human scale for each of us? Like,
right.
what kind of inquiry or self-inventory must we do to really look at ways that we're not kind of measuring up to then the measurement or even just the vision that we know is possible,
Right.
at all scales, communities, and regionally, nationally, is possible for the use of energy and the creation of continual like life and abundance moving forward.
Right, yeah, and I guess in relationship to how we initially started, in regards to how do we know like if we're on the right path or we're moving like towards like our highest being, I would say one is just trust in your like deepest intention to do so. You know, like really know and state or write down like your intention for yourself, like truly know that. And I would say to know, for me, how I've known like if it's true is if like the ultimate end is like how I can offer my gifts to the world. You know, how my intention is to grow to my highest potential in myself, but fundamentally for an offering. You know, just like trees grow, their goal is to grow to their highest potential, but really it's fundamentally they are like the protectors and holders of the entire forest. The most soil they build the most soil through the shedding of their leaves, to the shading of all, they hold the whole system together. So their gift is fundamentally an offering. And so that I think comes from, for me, how I've known that I'm on my right path is a trust in my intention and a felt sense of more life. Now, life holds all spectrum. Life also knows death. Like death is intricately part of life. And so through that process, like pain emerges, grief emerges, things that I might have been avoiding in my past or sort of shoving back are coming forth. And that is to me like a sign of my own capacity to hold and to be alive and to face like my own shadows, and then also just incredible positive affirming moments through synchronicities, through chance like encounters, through just amazing awe of nature, but a heightened sense of experience is super affirming of my past. So I would say like look for those signs.
Yes.
You know, and that's it. Those are super affirming. Yeah, I don't know
They're
if you
these
would...
like omens on the hero's journey that we're all on.
Definitely. Positive affirmations from your friends or family, or new relationships that emerge, you know, like moments when you face a fear that you would have always previously shied away from. These are very positive, affirming signs of like unfoldment of movement and actually life like emerging.
Definitely. And as part of that, that's just standing out to me right now as we continue in all of these conversations to try to notice the ways that kind of our predominant Western imperialist society shows up, the ways that we're indoctrinated in that. I just like mention with the trees, and that their full expression is actually of most service to all beings. Like this idea of abundance versus scarcity.
Totally.
That like each of us being in our full expression is actually like the greatest and most generous offering that we can do and that we can bring forward. And that doesn't take away from anyone else. There's enough room and space and different unique niches that we fill that is needed for all of us, the diversity of all of us to show up in our full potential. And I know like I can feel that even in being in more freedom, you know, like this sense of like, who am I to get to go to Peru and walk towards this next segment of this journey? There's such a sense of the privileges of that, and there are so many privileges around that, of course. And there's also a sense of I want that for everyone. In the sense of me acting on that freedom, I know and trust, I have to trust that that is not taking away from someone else's ability to also kind of surrender old ways of being and move towards more risk-taking and more vulnerability and more choosing of life.
Definitely. For me, it's been about a process of continuously moving towards more right alignment, you know, like moving towards life. But that process is like life, like nature is sometimes mirrors and reflects to me really hard. Shows me these ways in which I actually have been living completely out of alignment.
Oh my gosh.
You know,
Definitely.
and like before I can actually receive the gift of life, I have to let these parts die that are fundamentally maybe like entrapping me, and also like suppressing others, you know, through my purchasing habits and through all these different things. And so simultaneously in this emergence, and we can talk about it in super flowery language, is a seeing of what is real and true. And oftentimes that is very difficult.
So painful to really feel and sit with all of the limitations that we've been inherited and that we've also taken on ourselves, internalized that conditioning.
So in this winter time, we challenged it, if it's been hard and difficult, feel into if that's asking you to move towards that, and to continue to have like trust and faith and utilize some of the metrics we've talked about and some of your own felt knowings of positive reflection, to even when there's like dark times or totally unknown, you can find that like guiding light, that truth of your intention, like your ethics and like your values are pulling you forward. And
completely, and all of that experience and meaning is life.
Exactly. So thanks again for joining us. We hope this has been a very growthful winter for you. We're coming through it, and there's a lot more learning, a lot more sharing, and hopefully a lot more of this, even though we have a lot of resistance to doing it. We're going to continue to try to show up.
We're trying to practice, you know, showing up exactly as we are. And I hope you all can do the same. Much love, friends.
Much love.